Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to FPCI Public Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, today's forum is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. We are the largest foreign policy group in Indonesia, and in Southeast Asia, we have over 100,000 people in our network across Indonesia and throughout the world. And in the Pacific. Yes, correct. And yeah, we are delighted to have all of you here gathering in person. We have people coming from different institutions, communities, and organizations. We have people from think tanks, various universities, lecturers, students, and our guests from the press and diplomatic corps. We would like to acknowledge there are from Pakistan Embassy, from UK, Australia, and I saw on the list there is also Thailand, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Darussalam, Belgium, maybe joining online as well. So this forum is held hybrid. So let me also greet people who are tuning in from YouTube channel. We have over 600 registrants coming from over 50 countries. That includes ASEAN countries, Cambodia, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos. We also have participants coming from other countries like Korea, Egypt, Fiji, Mexico, and many others. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today's forum will be a debrief on the 42nd ASEAN Summit that took place last year, and we will hear views, impressions, and observations from our distinguished speakers that are joining us already here today. Let me greet them, Ambassador Dery Aman and also Dr. Rizal Sukma. Welcome to FPCI. So before we begin our session, let us first display a video, just a brief video about FPCI. Please enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us begin our discussion. And for that, I'd like to invite our founder and chairman, Dr. Dinapati Jalal, who is also going to be our moderator for today, to come to the stage, as well as our speakers, Ambassador Dery Aman and Dr. Rizal Sukma.
not against the law to clap here, is it?
No.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. And I want to thank Ambassador Dery Aman and Ambassador Rizal Sukma for speaking to us today. Rizal Sukma is an old friend of mine. We went actually to LSE together. We did our PhD under the same supervisor, Professor Michael Leifer, the legendary Southeast Asian specialist. And I would always remember Rizal because whenever he needed food, he always came to me, right? He was a poor student, and I had some money because I work at the Indonesian embassy, right? So, and cigarette also, right? So, but now you no longer smoke, right? Okay, good. And I'm glad that Pak Rizal, Pak Rizal is a top strategic thinker in Indonesia. I don't think there's anyone better than him, and he moved to become Indonesia's ambassador in the UK, very successful stint. And now he's back in Jakarta and continuing his contribution to Indonesian foreign policy thinking. And we have Ambassador Dery Aman, one of the ambassadors or diplomats that I admire, right? Because we had a mentor in former Foreign Minister Ali Alatas. He says you have to be intellectually macho as an Indonesian diplomat, meaning you're not afraid of other people's argument and you're never afraid of your own argument. You always have to face the music. And this is what I like about Ambassador Dery. He always wants to explain Indonesia's story, Indonesia's case to the general public. So thank you, Ambassador Dery. Yeah? And also want to welcome Professor Anne-Marie, who's visiting us from New York. She is a longtime specialist on Indonesia, Southeast Asia, many books. I've known her for a long time. When I was a junior diplomat, I knew her, and now that I'm retired for 8 years, you're still around and being very active. So thank you, Professor Anne-Marie. And by the way, I need to talk to you because my kids want to go to school in the US, maybe. Okay, good. So we are going to discuss the ASEAN summit. I think it was a very interesting summit for ASEAN and also for Indonesia. And I do believe that this is a high point of Jokowi's foreign policy. Last year was G20 presidency, which he completed successfully, despite very difficult circumstances. ASEAN is less high profile than G20, but nonetheless is a hugely important regional gathering. And I want to start by asking Ambassador Dery Aman about what, in his view, were the main achievements or results of the 42nd ASEAN Summit. Please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dino Patijalal. A very good afternoon to everyone. It's always a pleasure to be invited by the FPCI, and especially from Ambassador Dino Patijalal. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that I will share some information that would be useful to everyone, especially with regard to the convening and the results of the 42nd ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo that has been held last week. And of course, it's always a pleasure to see a good old friend, Pa Rizal Sukma, who has been our partner in the ministry in working, moving forward the ASEAN agendas in the perspective of Indonesia. But in this session especially, I think he will say the opposite to what I'm sharing with you. So that is the interesting part, I think, being here together with Ambassador Rizal Sukma. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, I see a lot of students. I hope, again, that what I'm going to share is something useful. First, may I start by saying that the decision to have the 42nd ASEAN Summit as the first summit of an ASEAN chairmanship is really strategic to be held in Labuan Bajo. It's very different because with the infrastructures that we have in Labuan Bajo and of course the natural beauty that we can offer from Labuan Bajo, it represents something different than previous ASEAN summits that we have experienced together. So the 42nd ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo is something unique. Also, it is something that is unprecedented in the way that we are organizing the magnitude of an ASEAN summit in a place that is very challenging in terms of the logistical arrangements, but I am very glad, although my face still represents the exhaustion that I experienced for a week. In fact, more than a week due to all the preparations. But I'm glad that we have gone through the first ASEAN Summit, which represents one of the first landmarks of the ASEAN chairmanship this year, which of course will be followed by the ministerial conferences in early July in Jakarta, and also the 43rd ASEAN Summit and the related summits in September in Jakarta, also in Jakarta. So let's go straight to the substance. I think by the 10 outcome documents that we have achieved in the 42nd Summit, it represents the seriousness of Indonesia of being chair of ASEAN. Although, I'm sorry, although substantially, of course, Ambassador Rizal Sukma will say differently, but the 10 outcome documents is representing what we have, our theme this year, ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth, which ASEAN Matters will address issues in the political security aspects, and Epicentrum of Growth will reflect the socio-cultural and the economic interests of ASEAN. So therefore, ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth has been reflected through this 42nd Summit in its 10 outcome documents, which I believe colleagues have seen all the outcome documents. And other results that are not merely reflected in the outcome documents, of course, within the discussions between the ASEAN leaders, which may not have been shared through outcome documents or being shared through medias. There are pertinent issues that has been ongoing discussion among the leaders throughout the summit, and it's a continuous and sustainable effort of ASEAN reflected by the discussions of our leaders that will culminate in the ASEAN Summit in September. So we will have to understand that all of these are a roadmap of the Indonesian ASEAN chairmanship, which in the end will come to the final results in the 43rd ASEAN Summit in September. So this summit is one stepping stone towards September 2023, and a lot of close, intensive discussion, whether it's in the meeting room, during the coffee breaks, or even when the leaders walk between the coffee breaks into the meeting rooms. There are discussions among leaders which not all of us may be aware what are the issues being discussed, but it will, of course, contribute to the results that we have achieved so far. So I would stop there for the opening, and of course, during the question and answers, I believe everyone will have different issues that you would like to go further into. But again, I just want to emphasize that the 42nd ASEAN Summit, as I am in the organizational part in the discussions, I'm not in the position to say whether it's a successful one or not, but I leave it to everyone who has been outside looking into the 42nd ASEAN Summit, whether it is indeed a successful one in terms of leading up to September. Again, I believe that almost all issues which are important to ASEAN, whether it's about the ASEAN community building process, the implementation of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, about ASEAN's external relations, about ASEAN's response towards global situations, global developments. All of them have been discussed in the Leader Summit, and again during the question and answers, I will be very happy to discuss further on specific issues that you would like to know. So once again, thank you very much, Ambassador Dino Patijalal, for your kind invitation and also for your kind words. I think it's overrated. So I hope that I'm here to share any information that I could share in my position. And it's part of my job to disseminate what are the specific and the important results of the 42nd ASEAN Summit. Thank you.
Thank you. Pak Rizal?
What's the questions?
Any
Well,
response that you would like to have?
Okay, well,
Main result of the ASEAN Summit.
right. So I think first, of course, thank you so much, Pak Dino, for inviting me to this debriefing on the ASEAN Summit, the 42nd ASEAN Summit, the summit that we organized after 10 years. The last one is 2011, is it? Yeah, I think it's been 10 years. So I'm afraid there's going to be 11 years if Timor-Leste become member. Well, first of all, I would like to say that there are a number of areas where I think praise is due. I would like to commend the fact that number one, it's not easy to organize a summit in a district, right? It's basically Labuan Bajo is in district. It's the first time I think, because we always either organize it in a province called Bali or in Jakarta. But this is the first time we did it in a district. I think it's Manggarai, is it? West Manggarai, Kabupaten West Manggarai in Nusa Tenggara Timur. People just say Labuan Bajo, actually the West Manggarai. So it's not easy. I heard a lot of stories about how difficult it was to organize and also to provide those logistical support, for all the leaders, and also, of course, for the delegations, hundreds of them. And then I think more than half actually had to stay, in the ships that were provided by the government of Indonesia. Second, I think it's commendable in the sense that it managed to revive the social and cultural agenda of ASEAN that has been an orphan, for such a long time, as the third pillar. So especially with the declarations on the human trafficking, right? So this is, I think, it's a very, very important that at the end, we all committed, to bring the social issues back, into the center of the ASEAN cooperation, because, at the end, these are the issues that matter the most, for the people of ASEAN and also for the people of Indonesia. So we, I think, did a very good job, in bringing together, all these ASEAN member states to really pay attention to that. So on these two fronts, I have to say that probably you get, 8 plus, or B plus, for that. But on the other hand, there are of course a lot of, also question marks, and still, to be frank, disappointments. I would say only two things here, before we go into the discussion as the overall results outside, the social, agenda. Number one, I think if ASEAN continues to do things the way it did, especially during the 42nd summit, ASEAN is on the path to the self-destruct mode. So, it really, I think, demonstrates that, it's quite oblivious, to all these geopolitical challenges, geopolitical change that, will become the key issues that everybody is talking about. And I think will also determine the future of this organization and also many countries, not only in Indo-Pacific, but I think all over the world. That's number one. So it is on the path, to self-destruct, mode if it continues to do things the way it did so far. That's the first impression that I have. Number two, the definition of insanity, right? So doing something over and over, then hoping a different result. That means you insane, Mengerjakan hal yang sama terus-menerus tapi berharap ada hasil berbeda, So it's like banging your head to the wall, then hoping that the wall will break. So that's basically, I think, the inertia that has become, an important, or not important, it's a significant part of the way ASEAN worked over the last, 5 years. So that's, I think, it's demonstrated again, in the 42nd summit. So in short, I would say that ASEAN has not been able to change, so it's immune, to the need, for change. After it did change a lot, after the end of the Cold War. So I think ASEAN was brilliant at the time, when it came up with the idea of how that we can connect to the major powers, connect to the outside world more. Remember the APT? That was the first mechanism that was ASEAN set up in order to help itself, to get out of the economic crisis of 1998. Then the East Asia Summit, it's also become, I think, a very important instrument, to sustain ASEAN relevance and utility at the time, for Indonesia and also for other member states. So it managed, to come up with the idea, where of course in between there is this ASEAN Regional Forum, but we'll come back to that later. So I think it needs to be dissolved anyway. So I think the East Asia Summit is a very important mechanism that ASEAN came up at the time in order to really address the challenges of the post-Cold War. But I have not seen something like that, in the 42nd summit. There are also other issues that I think we'll come back to that, like Myanmar, it's a big disappointment, and so on. So
okay. Can I follow up on that? I think that's a very interesting point. Why do you think that ASEAN today is incapable of adapting itself or making these bold changes as the previous eras did?
I think it's really because of the domestic nature of each member state, which, since the end of the Cold War, we see a lot of changes have taken place, in a number of key ASEAN countries, where I don't think that, the new elite that came up is really understand, the dynamics of the geopolitics and also the significance of geoeconomic changes that we are seeing at the moment. And at the end, ASEAN is what member states make of it, right? So you cannot basically rely on or even blame, one member state, because all these difficulties that we face simply also because the inability of this ASEAN member state, to actually push for change. So it's very clear. I think, I'm sure that you can share the story later with us, how frustrated, Indonesian delegation would become, in facing the inability to actually convince and also persuade other member states. But one thing that I would, say to Indonesian delegation or to Indonesian government, we should not be worried if we are accused of, trying to create this unity within ASEAN as long as we stick to the principle, of our foreign policy. So is this not Indonesia? If we want to push certain area, it is not Indonesia that create division, but other member states. So I think we should be brave enough to say that. Why? Because the utility of ASEAN for Indonesia has changed. I don't see, we should stick with ASEAN all the time, because most of our national strategic interests of 1960s and 70s have been already fulfilled by ASEAN. Probably if before, we need 10 things from ASEAN, now it's only 2. So in that context, we need to change our approach, in dealing with ASEAN. So that's both sides. In other ASEAN countries, it's also problematic. Then probably within our own, it's also quite problematic. The ability, the braveness, to actually lead need to be, encouraged.
Okay. Ambassador Derry, last year in Cambodia, the ASEAN leaders committed to operationalize the Indo-Pacific. Yeah? And as we know, AOIP sort of shifted down gear during the pandemic because there's not much that can be done during the pandemic. And hence that decision last year in Phnom Penh to operationalize the Indo-Pacific. Do you think that the 42nd ASEAN Summit moved the needle and has achieved a clearer path for AOIP to move forward?
Well, on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, before I go into that, Ambassador, may I just respond a little bit to what Ambassador Rizal Sukma has just shared with us. We must not forget that ASEAN today, as we see it, after 55 years of its establishment, it's there because ASEAN has its own way, which is the ASEAN way, which is the ASEAN consensus, which is open for critics from anyone. But without that, I don't think ASEAN will be what we see today. So it's a matter of how we choose among the options that we have, having an ASEAN which is not guided by the ASEAN way or the ASEAN consensus, or guided by the ASEAN way and ASEAN consensus, so that ASEAN still remain and exist as we see it today after 55 years. So there's a pro and contra and the positive and negative to that. But Indonesia, during its ASEAN chairmanship this year, we always try to come up with what we feel and what we see is best for ASEAN, especially in responding towards the challenges that ASEAN is facing, whether it's within the region, within ASEAN, beyond our region, and in a global world. So Indonesia is always in the position to try to come with all ASEAN member states that we need to go this certain path, but everything in the end, it's about what we can agree based on the consensus that we reach in ASEAN. And also that Indonesia, during its chairmanship, will always come up with new initiatives, visionary initiatives, which we find it very useful, not only for ASEAN member states, but most importantly for the people of ASEAN. How to bring ASEAN closer to the people, to the ASEAN community, and also contribute what is happening to the ASEAN region and beyond, and to the global world. So basically, fundamentally, that is how Indonesia want to lead ASEAN during its chairmanship. Now, on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, as we are all aware, it has been established in 2019. Now is 2023. It has been 4 years since its establishment, and Indonesia is from the beginning of our chairmanship, and especially since I've been appointed as the ambassador to ASEAN last year, we were in a position to try to push this agenda forward. It's of Indonesia's view that the discussion part of the implementation of the AOIP is completed, and therefore we are now entering in the phase of mainstreaming and implementing the AOIP, which is having practical cooperation, having projects, having activities which are based upon the AOIP for priority areas, maritime cooperation, connectivity, sustainable development goals, and other economic cooperation. We would like to see that there are, especially during our chairmanship, there are practical cooperation that we can agree among ASEAN and together with our external partners. The concept for Indonesia that we are offering to everyone is that this is an inclusive mechanism, And most importantly, it's open-ended. While we still respect the ASEAN mechanism that we have, whether it's ASEAN Plus One, the ASEAN Plus Three, the EAS, the ARF, other ASEAN-led mechanism, but we are also open that whoever our external partners who wants to work with ASEAN under the framework of the AOIP, we are open to that. And what I mean by that, it doesn't have to be ASEAN-led mechanism. It can be other mechanism. The important thing is that we have practical cooperation, we have activities, we have meaningful projects under the umbrella of AOIP that ASEAN work together with its external partners. So whether the question by Ambassador Dino Patijalal that whether the needle has moved, it has indeed moved from Indonesia's perspective, but Indonesia still see that we are not there yet. We still need to come up with concrete projects, and we encourage and also appreciate our external partners who have come with their ideas on how we can work together under the implementation of the AOIP.
I want to follow up on that, Ambassador Derry. There was an issue that I heard that in the run-up to the AOIP, to the birth of AOIP, not all of ASEAN were on board. There were some discussions and different viewpoints. Is that all behind us now? That is everybody in ASEAN a strongly committed stakeholder in the advancement of AOIP?
The straightforward answer is yes, everyone is on board. And I think, if I may just also share that the activity of our leaders, of the ASEAN leaders, sailing with the Finisi ship around Labuan Bajo represents that everyone is on board with the vision that ASEAN is having for the future, whether it's the post-2025 or for Indonesia, most importantly, on top of the post-2025 vision is what is ASEAN going to be in 2045, where Indonesia celebrates its 100th anniversary of its independence. So that is what Indonesia is looking at, post-2025, and how is ASEAN in 2045. So everyone is on board, and Indonesia will always take the lead to, together with our ASEAN member states colleagues, to work together with our external partners in implementing and mainstreaming this AOIP.
Okay, I'll get back to you one quick second, but I want to follow up while I have Ambassador Derry. Obviously, strategically, the Russia-Ukraine war has been one of the most serious challenges to European security, but it also has impact on the rest of the world, including the Indo-Pacific. How do you see the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific discussions, especially among ASEAN, change by the Russia-Ukraine war? Or it has not changed at all, right? Is that something that you can comment on? Yeah. And I want to get Pak Rizal's response to this also. Yeah, okay, please.
It has definitely changed the discussions and the way ASEAN interacts with our external partners, because what we are seeing with regard to the issue of Russia-Ukraine affected the ASEAN region. Not only ASEAN member states individually, but also the ASEAN region, and I believe the whole world. Food security, global supply chain, those are important issues that have been addressed by ASEAN together on how we can cope with the adverse impacts of the Russia-Ukraine issue, and the way ASEAN interacts with its external partners. In essence, Indonesia will always take the position as chair of ASEAN that everyone needs to be engaged. still needs to be engaged, continue our active engagement with all our external partners, regardless who they are, with the, of course, with the main objective that it will bring meaningful contribution towards ASEAN's agendas, and also that ASEAN has always been in a position to contribute to what is happening outside ASEAN and to the global world. So it does change to a certain extent on how we discuss matters, discuss issues with our external partners. But Indonesia is always putting forward that everyone should and must be engaged in dealing certain issues and most importantly to come up with possible solutions.
Ambassador Rizal, AOIP, where is it going next?
Well,
And are you happy with what happened at the 42nd summit?
no, it's actually an outlook, right? So it's an outlook that we want to put it out there to just, tell our partners, Japan, Australia, United States, that yeah, you can have your own, vision of the Indo-Pacific, but we also have our own. And if you look at that, process, what we want to emphasize is actually for us the inclusivity is the key. So that's nothing what make it different between our outlook and the rest of partners' outlook, especially Japan, US, and Australia. We actually in November, in Cambodia, I mean the ASEAN leaders did come up with a declaration on mainstreaming, right? Then they decided on promoting, right? But what we really need is really operationalizing, that which we have not really seen. So now is the outlook is basically is like it's a box, right? Just different box from what we have before. Then we arrange whatever we want to put in that box according to the shape of the current box. So it's still the box, but still actually what we put in there is actually all these scattered activities that we already have with all our partners. Remember last year, Japan was I think Japan is brilliant because they managed to come up with a report on how the Japan would already did support the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific by putting all the activities of cooperation between ASEAN and Japan within the 4 priority areas. So it's just rearranging it, the existing cooperation. So that's what ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific is all about at the moment. But we need to go one step further, operationalize it so that we can address 3 particular issues that the ASEAN outlook really want to address. If you read, every sentence, in the declaration of the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. Number 1, the emphasis on the importance of maritime domain, as the arena of cooperation and competition, that will, I think, characterize, the regions now and in the years to come. That's number 1. So that's why they put this maritime security as one priority area. Number 2, for the economic integrations, because in the importance of the economic elements. So that's why they put the priority areas number 4, economy and other form of cooperation, to be the important priority agenda priority of the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. But the third element of the Indo-Pacific outlook on Indo-Pacific is that how to navigate the China-US rivalry, which until today we haven't seen yet what ASEAN strategy is going to be. Well, we keep saying that we hope we don't have to choose. Inshallah, we will not choose, right? So, but that is not policy, it's not strategy, it's just a hope, right? So we need to come up with real, either say, I'm a realist IR, hedging, balancing, bandwagoning, what do you want? If China and US rivalry is really become, a real, and then become the, I think, the dominant feature of international politics in the Pacific. The available strategies so far, if you look at even the 2,000 years of history of IR, hedging, bandwagoning, or balancing. Non-aligned, yes, but it's more or less another form of hedging. Still, hedging. These 3 strategies. So ASEAN has not gone into that territory yet and then have a debate what sort of collective response or strategy that ASEAN needs. If ASEAN cannot have that collective strategy, then we should be able to have a debate in Indonesia on what sort of strategy that we need to adopt, and then try to actually sell it to ASEAN. So that's where the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific is at the moment. So I would need, and I want to see it 2 or 3 steps further than just this declaration and declaration. Because declaration, I'm tired with all the declaration. If you put all this declaration, I think from here to Surabaya already that long within ASEAN. That on the, but let me respond to 2 points that Ambassador Derry mentioned. Yes, the sailing in this ship, right, in Labuan Bajo is symbolized, what you call it, everybody on board. But it can also symbolize that ASEAN looking at its own sunset. It's not its own sunrise, right? So these leaders are all looking at sunset, yeah? But of course, I understand, difficult to wake these leaders up at 5 o'clock in the morning and then to go and then look at the sunrise. But so my point is that symbolic, gesture can be interpreted in a way whatever you like, in any way you like, right? So I don't see that an argument that we need to put forward. So you can also see it from different perspective. The second point already forgot. On the, well, my question now is really, why should we always have to have agreement within ASEAN, And then why it has always to be Indonesia that is expected to compromise, right? We have not resolved that, a problem yet. We always, forced to compromise. If we don't compromise, then we are so afraid to be called bully by other member, ASEAN member state. I don't see why we need to have agreement every time in any, in all ASEAN summit. So be it. Cambodia is even braver than Indonesia. Remember 2012? They insisted on certain point that no agreement, so be it. So Indonesia should be able to do that as well, I think, on certain issues, especially on issues like Myanmar, for example. It's very clear. And because I heard, but this is, I think, also a point that where we should praise the foreign ministry. At least they managed to stop those who want to turn the approach and then go back and recognize the junta. There are those elements within ASEAN, not within Indonesia. Indonesia put a stop to that attempt. So that's, I think, something that we really need to appreciate the foreign ministry during the 42nd summit.
And I'm going to get to Myanmar later. But Ambassador Derry, Indonesia pushed hard for AOIP in the beginning, yeah? Because that concept originated from a push by Indonesia. And obviously, Indonesia pushed hard this year because we are the chairman. I'm just wondering, after next year, it will be Laos and then on to the next chairmanships. Who's going to be driving AOIP? Are we going to rely on the chairperson of ASEAN to do the driving for AOIP? Or do you expect Indonesia to continue to be the de facto driver of AOIP?
Yes, of course, fundamentally, we hope that the chair of ASEAN will always continue. But then again, the AOIP is so strategic for Indonesia as one of the promoter or the initiator of this concept. Indonesia will stay alert, and together with all ASEAN member states, will always push for this agenda to move forward. And whoever the chair is, I think the AOIP will always be part of ASEAN's main agenda in moving forward. And I can assure you that Indonesia will always be in a position to, together with the chair and all ASEAN member states, to keep and to maintain that the AYP be one important agenda to be implemented, because AYP represents cooperation and collaboration. It represents dialogue. It represents interactions among ASEAN and its partners. So therefore, this is very strategic and important in terms on how ASEAN deals with the developments in ASEAN as well as ASEAN and the region, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. We have this outlook, or we have this concept of AYP to invite our partners to work together and collaborate, whether it is about addressing the developments of what Ambassador Rizal Sukma mentioned about the rivalry, or any other developments. The OIP will always be there to provide the forum for dialogue and cooperation and collaboration. I think that is the vision that we need always to keep in mind. And also, in terms of the sunset, it was quite cloudy, so we couldn't see the sunset, so maybe that's the good sign of it. But again, everyone was on board, of course, and the ship was represents sailing towards the same objective, towards realizing the same vision that ASEAN have post 2025 and beyond. And I can accept what Ambassador Rizal Sukma's view on that, but again, rest assured that as chair, Indonesia will always be at the forefront to put ASEAN remain relevant to ASEAN's interests, and also for the Indo-Pacific region. And don't forget, in September, we are having this ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum to implement the AOIP, which would signify or represent the actual implementation of the AOIP by having these practical cooperation and projects. In September, we will try to have everything in a concrete manner in terms of the implementation of the OIP. And in Cambodia last year, Indonesia, together with the chair at that time, was the one who come up with the idea of having this declaration on the OIP that I put it as the discussion phase is over. Now we are going into the implementation phase, and 2023 can be put as or understood as the year that we start to implement the OIP with concrete projects and activities.
Okay. Ambassador Rizal, I think the one sentence on news that really caught my attention from the 42nd summit was when President Jokowi said that ASEAN should or will recognize Quad and AUKUS as partners, right? I think this is a shift from, I think, earlier position that saw AUKUS as something potentially destabilizing and so forth. And meanwhile, the line on Quad, at least in Indonesia, had not been established yet. You know, there was now more clarity on this, right? And I'm glad there's clarity, but I would like to ask your view. What is the significance of this statement? And then after that, I want to get Ambassador there to give some background. You know, what prompted President Jokowi to say that, which I think, you know, I'm sure Beijing noticed that. I'm sure Delhi, I'm sure Washington, Tokyo, Canberra, they all noticed that, because it is a shift in Indonesia's position on Quad and AUKUS. Yeah, Ambassador Rizal Sukma.
That statement actually was given during the interview with the New Straits Times. this is the Malaysia's newspaper. It's not within the ASEAN summit context, but is the interview that the president did, and he has that habit. He did interview a lot of international interview before certain international event, and that statement was given there. Well, first,
Impromptu. Is that what you're saying?
no, it's actually in the interview.
Yes. Yeah.
This is a structured interview.
Yeah.
With the News Straits Time. I think he said that again with the TV3, yeah. So the interview, but that's very much with the News Straits Time, and I think the question has been given in advance. Of course, it's not really a question that is not expected. First, I have to notify. I have to say that actually is really deviate a bit, from what this dominant narrative coming out of Pejambon, right? If you look at the narrative coming out of Pejambon, especially from Pak Kadir, and also from those who work in the legal departments, they basically said that, well, AUKUS is very dangerous because it might violate the NPT, then it would create the arm race, and also create unnecessary tension, in the region. So that's the narrative that the line, right? And then suddenly the president himself said that, look, AUKUS is not a competitor. It basically is not a problem, but it's a partner. Then of course, Quad, right? Quad is a bit different from AUKUS. So this is where I think things get weird because the president limed together, the Quad and the AUKUS. But I would say that, I think these are the emerging new minilaterals that a lot of people have been talking about. It is a reality, right? Then, I think Pak Jokowi tend to adopt a rather different approach by looking at whatever new emerging development in the region from the positive side, and then try to encourage all of us to explore, are there positive side that we can actually tap into. So that's, I think, the way he thinks all the time. Something come out, is always try to look at the positive aspect of that. Well, with Quad, I think very clear. There are a lot of opportunities that ASEAN and Quad can work together. If you look at the areas where Quad begin to work closely on the combating pandemic, on the disaster management and all those kind of issues. So I think ASEAN and Quad can cooperate and then should cooperate, in those areas. With AUKUS, do not forget that AUKUS has two pillars, right? We can continue to have a debate on the first pillar about whether the transfer of technology into the nuclear-powered submarine can create this step toward, say, having a nuclear weapon, or undermining the NPT and so on. Those would in legal side we're always worried about that. Well, there are loopholes in the NPT that we need to safeguard. Those on the realist side would always argue, well, if you feel threatened, there's nothing else that you can do except you equip yourself with a better and stronger defense. So I think I will leave that aside because you're not going to resolve that. So I can't see how that we can see and work with AUKUS on that pillar, right? We are not going to build the nuclear-powered submarine, right? So it's not a partner. So leave it there. But on the second pillar, if you look at the cooperation among the three on the emerging technology, on the quantum, on the IT, AI, on the hypersonic technology and so on. That's where, in my view, the possibility for working together, at least in research and also in learning what they are working on, is there. So we should not close down the opportunity, because this is critical emerging technology that we also need to understand. So that's probably what the president look at. Well, AUKUS can also be or should be seen as a partner rather than as competitor. So I think within that context. So I think Jokowi understand very well there are two pillars to AUKUS, right? I think the general public only see, and I think the foreign ministry also, some of them at least, not Pak Dery, think AUKUS in only one pillar. Like this about building the nuclear-powered submarines, but it is not. Thank you.
Ambassador Dery, so what's behind that comment? And were the foreign ministry shocked, or they were not surprised? What was the background to this?
In my view, first, I would say that we all must accept and understand that ASEAN is always open for any engagement, for any cooperation, possible collaboration to anyone. So that is the basic playing field for ASEAN. We, at least Indonesia, puts ASEAN, they have, ASEAN has to be always open to any possibilities of engagements, interactions, possible collaboration with any parties outside ASEAN. And second point that I need to share with all of you, that Quad and AUKUS, the member countries in that Quad and AUKUS is ASEAN's dialogue partners. So there is a fundamental point that we also need to understand, that individually, ASEAN has its mechanism, cooperation, working mechanism with those countries. The third point, there is no mechanism yet between ASEAN and Quad, between ASEAN and AUKUS. There's no official mechanism yet, or maybe not at all in the future. We don't know. The fourth point, there were no discussions related to Quad and AUKUS specifically during the meetings within the 42nd ASEAN Summit. Of course, it has been mentioned as something that ASEAN needs to start to put into its attention on the existence of Quad and AUKUS. Based on the first point, I would say that Indonesia will always be open to the possibility of having dialogues, possible cooperation and collaboration with Quad. That would be, of course, of ASEAN's interests. It meets ASEAN's interests. It would support ASEAN's agendas. The cooperation is something meaningful, like cooperation that I can say that there is one connection between ASEAN and the Quad within the ASEAN-US framework, which Quad has been supporting ASEAN in terms of its vaccines delivery, distribution towards ASEAN member states. That's the only point that is officially put into the ASEAN document so far with regard to ASEAN Quad. ASEAN AUKUS, there's nothing. So that is the situation. But again, Indonesia will always be in a position to see whether there is traction, there is benefits if we do need to engage with Quad or AUKUS. Like Ambassador Rizal Sukma shared to us, the second pillar of AUKUS is something, of course, that perhaps ASEAN may look into it further. But again, there's no formal mechanism, there's no formal dialogue or cooperation between ASEAN with Quad or ASEAN with AUKUS. I would say that Pak Jokowi is mentioning during the interview, based on the general knowledge, that ASEAN is open to any interaction, any cooperation that is possible, which of course we see it as it should be meaningful to ASEAN. So, and also that ASEAN will always remain open to any possibilities of further cooperation with any parties. And in Indonesia's chairmanship this year, under the Indo-Pacific region vision, or the AOIP, Indonesia is proposing, together with our ASEAN members colleagues, that we could expand our cooperation between ASEAN and IORA and ASEAN and the PIF, the Pacific Island Forum, and the Indian Ocean Rim Association, because that represents also the geographical area of the Indo-Pacific. So that would of course represent that ASEAN is always open to further collaboration with anyone outside ASEAN, which we deem as important and which would create further benefits for ASEAN.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on to Myanmar. Pak Rizal, what is the scorecard from your viewpoint? And I would, of course, after that, like to get the response from Ambassador Derry.
Well, I think the leaders already, acknowledge that nothing changed, on Myanmar. So I think, Myanmar still, has not implemented the 5-point consensus. So that's why if you read the last paragraph of the declaration, leaders declaration, it says that, because no progress, then, this that Myanmar cannot attend the high-level meeting or summit or the EMM remain. All the sanctions, quote unquote, that's been put, on Myanmar remain. So that's, I think, it's quite good of ASEAN, recognizing that has not been any meaningful, progress so far. But I think, again, like I mentioned earlier, there were those forces, within ASEAN who really want to say, udahlah, we're tired, so let the junta back and then attend the meeting. So let's normalize in a way, probably not in that straightforward language, but basically, you can tell that, some members, want to normalize the junta's rule in Myanmar, and then we put a stop to that, in the sense that we still insisted that Myanmar junta has not made any progress, so we should continue, to engage them, in order, to say push them to really implement at least the three key points in the 5-point consensus. Indonesia, I think, has changed a different approach, compared to the previous chairs. We want to focus on creating this conducive environment that make it possible for all the stakeholders to come together to the negotiating table and then try to look for a political solution. So I think that is the approach. But unfortunately, so far, there is no indication whatsoever that effort, has actually been, successful. But again, when you ask, friends in the foreign ministry, what are the things that you have done, they would say, well, you cannot know because it's quiet diplomacy, right? So then, we willing to give the benefit of the doubt. So that approach, I think, really raised the expectation even higher. When Indonesia's foreign ministry said, we are adopting the quiet diplomacy, all the journalists say, okay, kita tunggu deh, May. We will wait, until May summit. Then we will ask you what you have done. Then when you said nothing happened, even though you engaged, 60 times and so on, but no outcome, then disappointment is really there. So that, I think, the downsides of this quiet diplomacy, because, because of the quiet, you do not actually reveal what you're doing, then the expectations become very high. Then when nothing, actually came out during the summit, then the expectation, the disappointment is also very high. But I think there are still, doubts that, a lot of us, willing to give and wait until September. But this is quite dangerous also. Then until when the September come, then, you will say, okay, let us Laos, and then let Laos, to continue, the work. Then all this expectation that Indonesia would be able to combat, to push Myanmar, to really implement the 5-point consensus, will be gone forever. And that's the legacy that I don't think that we want to leave as a chair of ASEAN. So I think friends in the foreign ministry has 5-6 months now to really, push, more, in order to get, some result. So that's why for Myanmar, for the junta, to actually implement. If you ask me what Indonesia should do, I'm running out of ideas. So all ideas is already out there, right? And then this is the hardest problem that, I think ASEAN ever faced. But I think Indonesia should not really depend on ASEAN all the time in addressing the view. There should also be an Indonesian approach, like we did when we deal with, I mean, your dad is in the team at that time, deal with the Cambodian problem. You know, ASEAN, but Indonesia is Indonesia. We talked to the Vietnamese, you know, we managed to bring everyone in on board, then, you know, led to that Paris, you know, agreement. So I think we should not like really, you know, it's like this group of swan, like going there together with tan, going there together. Sometimes you should be a tiger as well, no?
Ambassador Derry here.
Um,
And I want to open up questions after this. So anyone who want to, please raise your hand. Yeah, please.
on this specific issue, I think we are much closer, Ambassador. So, first, Indonesia as chair, which also represent the special envoy of ASEAN on the issue of Myanmar. We have been very active and looking at all creative ideas and possibilities in discharging our duty as the special envoy of ASEAN. The difference is that we have seen what Brunei and Cambodia has undertaken its role as the special envoy. So therefore, Indonesia decided that we need a different approach, which is more of a quiet diplomacy, not a megaphone diplomacy. So that is why most of us in the public, even to a certain extent the media, do not know what Indonesia has been doing so far in undertaking its role as the special envoy. We have done a lot, and it's all through all the available channels that Indonesia managed to build, all the possibilities, back channels, the contacts on the grounds, all stakeholders that we can have these connections and communication. All of them are being part of Indonesia's efforts. And again, it has not been shared specifically who, where, when. So we are doing our work on that. So now, after the during the 42nd summit, this is one issue that all leaders discussed in an open manner. Everyone, I would say, provided their views on how they feel, re-emphasizing their positions, putting forward suggestions, creative ideas, and in the end, based on that discussion, that open discussion among our leaders, the decision was, as stated by President Jokowi during the press conference, that the efforts that have been taken by Indonesia so far as the special envoy will continue, will be strengthened, will be intensified, especially in trying to engage all stakeholders. And by engaging all stakeholders, it does not mean that it would represent or signal anything about recognition to the junta. So by that statement, I think it's quite clear that all stakeholders would also mean, I'm not going to say it, but it does not represent recognition. So engagement to new possibilities, new parties within Myanmar, which is part of the all stakeholders, will be undertaken by Indonesia as the special envoy to try to come to a possible solution or moving the agenda forward in terms of the implementation of the 5-point consensus, which all ASEAN member states are in agreement, same understanding that there is lack of implementation by our Myanmar's friends with regard to the implementation of the 5-point consensus. There's no significant progress, very little progress, lack of progress with regard to the 5-point consensus. So the 5-point consensus will remain as the only and valid basis for ASEAN in working together with Myanmar. It's an ASEAN-led mechanism, but it should also be a Myanmar-owned mechanism. So that is the work that Indonesia is going to undertake for the remaining period of Indonesia's chairmanship. And the most important part to this also is the cessation of violence and also the humanitarian assistance that needs to be given the full access without discrimination to everyone who are needing it in Myanmar, especially with the current hurricane that we experienced, the Mocha. Indonesia is in a position to gather around our support, our humanitarian assistance in a bilateral manner towards Myanmar post the Mocha the hurricane that has just happened, and also together with the ASEAN Secretariat and the AHA Center, we are working to provide the assistance that our Myanmar friends are needing after the hurricane that we have experienced together. So that is the current status with regard to Myanmar. We are going to intensify and strengthen and open any further possibilities of engagement to all stakeholders in Myanmar, with the hope that further developments or progress can be achieved, and the barometer for ASEAN is the 5-point consensus. Only that.
Okay, let me take some questions. All right, gentlemen in front. Anyone else? We'll just take one round. Jenny, but anyone else? Okay, I'll prioritize that guy. And gentleman from Afghanistan. Pakistan, sorry. Afghanistan closed their embassy, I think. Yeah. So, yes, please. Afi. Yeah. Only one question, yeah?
Okay, thank you.
To whom? Yeah.
Yeah. My name is Rio. I'm postgraduate student from Universitas Gadjah Mada. First of all, I'm glad that Dr. Dino already said about the new Straits Times interview, because it's related to that. Because when President Jokowi said partnership, I have this implication that this partnership means that ASEAN will have their own terms and conditions on the table to negotiate with the, either AUKUS or Quad. Now, so far there are no mention of the either AUKUS or Quad in the final chair statement. Only 4 points about the Indo-Pacific region and sticks about external relations, with no mention whatsoever about that. But let's pretend there's a magic ball on the table, and I want to ask what is the possible outcome? Maybe the operationalizing that Dr. Sunga said regarding to President Jokowi's statement about that. Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Thank you. My name is Jibik from Nikkei Japanese Media. As you know, G7 Hiroshima Summit will be held in this week, and President Jokowi has been invited to the meeting. And as a ASEAN chair, and I think he's at the same time he's a representative of so-called global South countries. And I want to ask you, what do you think can G7 do to the global South countries at this moment? Global South what can global South countries do to the what do G7 can do to the global South countries at this moment?
Global South countries.
Countries. Yeah. Sorry.
Pakistan?
So my question from panel is that in the backdrop of global contestation and the geostrategic and geopolitical spotlight shifting towards the ASEAN region, the latest, as Pa Rizal or the panel said, that the Pa Jokowi has said that we are going to have cooperation with Quad. Do you think it won't have any effect on the non-alignment policy of the majority of the ASEAN country, and the centrality of ASEAN country would really be questioned in this kind of cooperation, where you know that one power has raised this kind of alliances, may that be political or security alliances, against the other one? And the second part of the same question is, do you think this contestation would be turning into a hot contestation soon in the future, or still ASEAN has not considered any such eventuality? Thank you.
Gentleman in white and yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Sandy Surya, and I'm from Partnership for Indonesia Sustainable Agriculture, or PIS Agro. And as Padino mentioned, that Jokowi is bolstering, is about to promoting and boosting the partnership between ASEAN countries and other countries in the Indo-Pacific and other regions. That the partnership is really needed for the sustainable development. So one of the questions is, what are the possible agendas and also possible partnership discussions for, and also this the possible partnership schemes to develop the sustainable development, especially in development in the sustainable agriculture, and also the efforts to minimize the carbon footprint that according to Indonesia's NDCs, and also the minimizing the carbon footprint as well. Thank you.
Well, in the interest of time, I'm just going to let Ambassador Derry and Rizal answer. You can pick which questions you want to ask. And I know I got some YouTube questions, but I think we're running out of time. So, but thank you to Governo from Philippines, Fajar and Gabi, questions from YouTube. They're watching from live stream, yeah? Go ahead. Who first?
I think all the questions are directed.
And I think the government want to have the last word.
Only the government can answer the question. So actually, it all asks, what the government will do, right? I'm not government anymore, so.
Thank you very much for all the questions. I think question number 1, 2 is 1 and 3 is quite related. On the partnership, Quad or AUKUS, I think it's quite clear that I've mentioned before that there is no formal partnership yet, or even there's a possibility there will be no partnership at all between ASEAN, Quad, and AUKUS. But again, it is clear that ASEAN will always remain open to any possibility of interactions, communications, and then cooperation and collaboration. And for Indonesia, based on the statement by our president, we would of course have this national mechanism that we need to come up with the policy that we are going to adopt based on what we are having right now. And again, I am in the position to say that I don't think that we have a new foreign policy on this yet, and this is something that we are being putting forward to show that Indonesia, together with ASEAN, we are always open to any further cooperation with the hopes and the objectives that these cooperation and collaboration will directly or indirectly provide benefits to Indonesia, to ASEAN, and the region. So I would suggest and encourage everyone that we look at it at that kind of framework where officially there is no such foreign policy, if I may say, or framework or concept, but just to show that under Indonesia's leadership, ASEAN should always be mindful and open towards any possibility of cooperation. So that would be my general response to question number 1 and 3. And with regard to G7, well, I think the objectives and the basic agenda of the G7, one of it, I believe, it's about how they are willing or they are committed to work together with the South. And as Indonesia, I'm speaking on behalf of Indonesia, not on behalf of ASEAN, will always also be in a position to see that the G7 is something that is providing contribution to the global world, as they are members of the developed countries. So it's only natural that the developing world countries like Indonesia have expectations that they would provide something positive, encouraging to the world, and also put their special attention also to the South. So by that, this is the geopolitical and geo-economic dynamics that I think Indonesia will always want to see, that there is cooperation between developed and developing countries. So the G7 in Hiroshima would be very strategic, with taking into account the developments that we are seeing in the world and especially in the region, and most importantly, the southern countries. So the South will always have high expectations towards the G7, what they can contribute to make the world better. And the last, I think you are touching upon the issue of agriculture. With the Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship, especially on epicentrum of growth, we are working right now together with our ASEAN colleagues to come up with a declaration which really signifies the epicentrum of growth, which would deal with the economic pillar and the socio-cultural pillar, and the issues with regard to agriculture, especially food security and global supply chain, will be represented in that theme of epicentrum of growth. And this would be one expected outcome, major outcome, that we will see during the 43rd ASEAN Summit in September.
Okay, good. By the way, I have a tickling question. Do you mind if I just get it out of my system? So the 42nd summit, as you said, will push for AOIP, and then afterwards the next chairman. But is there a tacit understanding among ASEAN leaders that, hey, AOIP is an Indonesia thing, and as we progress, we expect Indonesia to keep doing its thing, the way the ASEAN political and security community was seen as an Indonesia thing, and we kept pushing no matter who's the chairperson, right? Is that the same situation with Indo-Pacific? Despite your comment that yes, everyone is on board and so on, yeah, but is there that tacit understanding that hey, this is the Indonesia thing, let Indonesia keep pushing this here?
If the term understanding, I don't think that there is that kind of understanding, but there is, of course, recognition that this concept of the AOIP, Indonesia as the initiator, who came up first with this idea and being discussed and agreed together with ASEAN, it became an ASEAN-owned concept. And as an initiator, as let's say AOIP could be regarded as a baby of Indonesia. It's part of Indonesia's responsibility to see that the baby grows well. And by that, we also hope that this is a concept of ASEAN, that everyone will remain together with all ASEAN member states in moving forward this agenda. So I don't think there is an understanding, okay, we'll stay behind, Indonesia will be in front. I don't think that there is that kind of thoughts among ASEAN member states. We are all in this together, but there is a recognition that Indonesia came up with this idea, and it's a moral obligation for Indonesia to see that AOIP will progress.
Okay, thank you. That's the answer I was actually trying to generate from you. Thank you. And Pak Rizal, last word, and I take that as your last word. So, Pak Dubes Rizal.
Well, on this Quad and AUKUS, yeah, I think the president was asked this question. It's about how he sees the Quad and AUKUS. It's not that Pak Jokowi said that ASEAN will cooperate with Quad and AUKUS, but basically he just saying that we should see Quad and AUKUS as partners, not competitors. Because, if you recall, so there are three big narratives about this AUKUS when it first announced. Number one, a lot of people say this is actually, undermine NPT. Number two, it will undermine ASEAN centrality. Then number three, actually, it will trigger arms race. These three narratives, right? All over the place, in our newspapers, in the discourse and so on. So I think within that context, the president basically said that, look, we should not see the Quad and AUKUS as a competitor. It's not a competitor to ASEAN, this attempt, because they're not institution, they're not organization. They're just arrangements, if you like, within, this wider network of cooperation. Once on the technology sharing, cooperation or arrangement, the AUKUS, and then on this security arrangement, security cooperation arrangement between the four members of the Quad. So within that context, the president just say we should see Quad and AUKUS as partners, not competitors. So it's not like he already has some kind of a framework or plan. This is how we are going to cooperate and so on. Well, of course, we can push further by asking, well, if we want to see Quad and AUKUS as partners, what sort of partnership that we want and what areas that we can partners with, right? So then, like I mentioned, on AUKUS, look at the second pillars, and then on the Quad, look at all the four areas that they are working on, such as the vaccination, pandemic, disaster management, and so on. And of course, these are the areas where ASEAN can actually work with the AUKUS and Quad. Well, some say that, everyone is on board of the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific because not much in there. So it's not going to undermine your national interest anyway. So let's sign up to it, right? So it's like the AC, right? Some countries, external powers, initially really, refuse to sign, they accede, to the TAC because they're worried there would be legal obligation. Then they read it carefully, there's nothing there, so they signed it. So I think that's also the case with the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. So that's why it is not only moral obligation of Indonesia, but also a strategic necessity for Indonesia to push for not only mainstreaming and promoting, but especially on the operationalization of the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. So I think the burden to operationalize it, the task, the duty, and the obligation is on us. We propose it, we should not leave it at that, right? I think so. This is what that we are asking the Indonesian government to do. But of course, it's great if we can bring a few others, real supporters of the ASEAN Outlook, on board. So I'm going to be frank with you. Not all ASEAN countries basically see the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific is a good thing. So some probably don't really bother. Some don't really see this is important anyway.
Which some is that?
So I can't say that. You can ask him.
Okay. All right. Well, let's give a big hand to Ambassador Rizal and Ambassador Derry. Look, and I want to thank you because I really got a lot of it, and you guys answered the questions directly, and of course Ambassador Derry diplomatically, and Ambassador Rizal with the usual academic candor that he usually does. So thank you very much, and let's give him a very warm and appreciative applause here. And I also want to congratulate our friend from Nikkei for you just came from Bali, right? You look tan. I almost didn't recognize you with your mask, right? So there you go. So he's Japanese, but he looks Indonesian with the tan. So congratulations. A couple of announcements. 2 days from now, we are going to establish FPCI Middle Power Studies Network, MPSN. Yeah, and this is going to be a network of universities and think tank focusing on middle power. Yeah, so this is going to be launched 2 days from now. Is on the 17th of May. Yeah. And then the second announcement is FPCI will publish books by Amitav Acharya in Bahasa Indonesia, the end of the American World Order, and then also ASEAN Security Community. It will be in Bahasa Indonesia and it will be sold in bookstores. So if you see them, please grab them. Yeah. Third, Professor Amitav Acharya and myself have agreed to establish or to write a monograph, a book on Indonesian foreign policy under President Jokowi. Yeah. So actually, last night we agreed that this is a project that we're gonna embark on. So it will be followed. The next step will be a short report on this, but the actual book itself will be produced shortly after President Jokowi steps down, just to be safe. And then fourthly, we are going to have a foreign policy camp in Bali. The date to be announced, but this is a camp where serious foreign policy enthusiasts will spend a few days in Bali and to listen to lectures from great foreign policy thinkers, who will come from the United States, from Australia, from Singapore. And if you are a serious foreign policy enthusiast, please join that effort. And finally, June 24th, you have to put that date, it's a Saturday, FPCI will convene Indonesia Net Zero Summit. This is the biggest climate forum in Indonesia. Yeah, I said the biggest climate forum in Indonesia. We expect thousands of people. It will be in the XX1 ballroom at the Jakarta Theater. All day long, we're going to have ministers, officials, activists, think tanks, celebrities, all discussing what Indonesia should do next. And this is an independent forum. It's not organized by the government. It's organized by FPCI and climate activists. So do register. You can check it from our website. And I look forward to seeing you. And thank you for attending our event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Deriaman, Dr. Rizal Sukma, for the insightful discussion. We would like to take some pictures for documentation, so I invite Pak Dino, Pak Rizal, and also Ambassador Deriaman to stand up and we'll take some pictures. Committee? Yeah. Yes, here. And also we have a gift from FPCI. Should we take a pictures while we hand the gift, Akbar? Right, there you go. Oh, okay. Yes, and we have a gift from FPCI to our panelists. All right. Once again, thank you, Dr. Rizal Sukma, Ambassador Deriaman, for joining us, and thank you everybody for attending. This public forum is available for rewatch in our YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. See you at our next event.
Jawabannya Pak Dubes pas tuh bahwa dia fakta. Iya. Bukan musuh. Gimana, Pak?